I hope you all listened to the inspiring speech from Sheikh Sharma just now. Some real food for thought. And thanks again to Sheikh Sharma for joining us here today. We'll continue the theme of sustainability now with our next guest, Qais Bader Al Suwaidi, Assistant Expert at the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. But just a few housekeeping points before we start. And this session will be recorded, so you can come back to listen to it again later. And don't forget to use social media to talk about this, and use the discussion forum to discuss with your colleagues these really, really important themes. But over to Qais now. Qais, it's an honour and pleasure to have you here with us today. Qais Bader Al Suwaidi is the lead on climate change policy at the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. Notably, Qais manages the UAE's National Adaptation Programme, a nationwide multi-sectoral risk assessment and adaptation planning effort to help improve the resilience of economic, social and natural systems in the UAE. He's also involved in other projects, including climate change modelling, climate legislation and international climate negotiations. Qais holds a Bachelor in Sciences from the University of Melbourne, a Master of International Law, Diplomacy and International Relations in Sustainable Development from the Paris Sorbonne University, and a Master of Public Policy from the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government, which is, truly impressive, Qais. So let's raise a virtual hand of applause to welcome our guest to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you as well for the invitation today here to address the ACT. It's a real pleasure and honor to be with you today. So I'm going to talk about climate change, the impacts of climate change, why we need to act, and then how we can address the risks, and then also talk about the opportunities that climate change policy and action in general presents to us. And then towards the end, I'll be talking about the UAE's approach to climate change, as well as the impacts on us here in the UAE and the broader region. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today you'll be aware of, but it works as a good reminder, as always, of the imperative of action when it comes to climate change. Let me get the clicker. So if we can just move to the next slide. Okay, I can do that now. Okay, that's good. So a lot of human stories, of course, when it comes to climate change. One important one is, of course, the one we witnessed last September. And this is not 20 years from now, not 50 years of now, not 2100. It has already happened. So a quarter of Bangladesh was flooded. A quarter, we're talking about a country where more than 170 million people live, more than with a high level of extreme poverty, least developed country, very densely populated, and then a quarter of it was flooded. Now again, Bangladesh is one of the most low-lying countries in the world, and then again, you see these impacts of climate change, as the New York Times here says, the people least responsible for climate change are among those most hurt by its consequences. Sorry, I'm using the, okay. Next, another sad story. This is just a year ago. This is from the BBC website. Typhoon Goni in the Philippines, another densely populated developing country, where this father here lost his child, his two children and wife, due to the flooding, the aftermath of the typhoon. And these typhoons have been very frequent in the Philippines, and the damage they're causing is, of course, enormous. Now, again, just as a reminder, we're not saying that climate change causes these extreme events. Of course, they've been there for very long. But then again, what we know, what science tells us, is that these events have become more frequent and more intense as a result of climate change, and they'll be even more frequent and intense in the future. Another story still going on in Southern Africa, in countries like Zimbabwe, Mozambique, where there is a deadly drought. More than 11 million people are living in extreme hunger due to two cyclones that hit the southern part of Africa and have left a very heavy drought in that part of the world, where poverty is already common, but also now hunger they have to deal with another issue. And this has been going on now for a year or so in that part of the world. Closer to home, the Middle East. This is an article from The Economist back in 2018, where it says climate change is making the Arab world more miserable, with longer droughts, hotter heat waves, and more frequent dust storms. So one common theme here maybe is that the least, or the developing countries, are disproportionately hit by climate change, and they're more vulnerable because of where they're located on Earth, but then at the same time, because of their ability to cope. Of course, they're not that developed, and they can't. Governments as well as people in these countries are not able to cope with these new impacts that climate change has brought to them. This is a chart that looks at the overall natural hazard score, and if you see, most of the countries here on this chart are the poorer countries, densely populated poorer countries, mostly in Asia. Philippines, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Indonesia, Vietnam, Pakistan, but also India and China. So that's another, one more time, one more reason why we need to think of climate change as also an ethical problem, a moral issue, because the countries, the people most impacted are the most vulnerable. And in these very vulnerable countries is the most vulnerable in these countries that are impacted. And we're talking millions here, people's livelihood, but also other impacts. And of course, biodiversity and ecosystems in general. So climate change disproportionately impacts poorer countries, but developed countries are also vulnerable. So if we look here at this, again, another news article from the Diplomat this time, and Japan is hammered by record-breaking torrential rains and deadly floods. This was in July of this year. And if you go back to, if you do a simple Google search, you'll see there was another record-breaking rain event in Japan back in 2018. So these events, again, are very common, they're frequent and very intense. And in a country as developed as Japan, you have more than nearly 70 people dead, not to mention the damage to the infrastructure. Another example, well, this is a reminder that everyone will be impacted. Earth has warmest September on record. This is in this year. And 2020 might surpass 2016 in becoming the hottest year on record. And then when you talk about temperatures, of course, it's not only about human health, that people in the outdoors being impacted, but also indoors in countries where air conditioning is not common, but also you're talking about more frequent forest fires. You're talking about infrastructure breakdowns. And one such breakdown we spoke about in California, but before that, this is again in California. This is a screenshot of the California Fire Department website. So in this season, so the red fires are still active, apparently, but the gray ones are already contained. This year, we had more than 4 million acres of forest burned, more than 9,000 incidents, 31 fatalities, and more than 10,000 structures damaged or destroyed in California alone. And this, again, we know for a fact that at least 30% contribution of climate change due to the drought that climate change causes, that these fires become more possible. The probability of fires breaking becomes more possible due to climate change. Again, in California, and this is the impact of heat waves on our very vital infrastructure, which is, electricity, power, the power grid. A lot of breakdowns have been witnessed in California, impacting more than 2 million people due to a very strong heat wave that hit California in August of this year. Oops. Here, on a lighter note, probably, and here again, we can also see the impact of climate change. And this was back in 2019. Of course, there are many interesting things on this photo. The Queen is one, the Prime Minister as well. But also there's something that tells you, something about the impacts of climate change on even the richest of us. And that thing is this Dyson fan. So there's a Dyson fan in the background of this picture. There was a very bad heat wave, again, as is happening now in overall Europe in the last 20 years, where you're having heat waves that lead to significant damage to human health, again, especially in places where indoors cooling is not available. And then that requires, of course, infrastructure, new in places like where air conditioning was unheard of. Now new developments need air conditioning, or even need to retrofit older buildings for them to be habitable. Well, you need to retrofit them with air conditioning to just make them, habitable to humans. So all these changes, all these differences that have been made to our lives are due to climate change, and this is why climate change is it's a significant threat. It's a significant change to our lives that needs action. And one good thing, perhaps, is that climate change is human-induced, and it's good because since it's human-induced, we should be also able to do something about it. Now, how it happens, this is Climate Change 101, I'm sure you know about this. So greenhouse gases, of course, the culprit. This is why we're having climate change. But then they're important. Greenhouse gases are there in our atmosphere. They make life possible on Earth because they trap some of the sun's heat. So without this layer of greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide, temperatures on Earth will be on average -16 or so. But then because of this layer, the average is something like +18. But then what we're doing by burning fossil fuel, by cutting forests, is that we're increasing the emissions, the release of these gases into the atmosphere, and that makes this layer of greenhouses thicker, and that means trapping more heat. So this is a human-enhanced greenhouse effect. There's a natural greenhouse effect, which is useful, which is essential for life on Earth, but the human-enhanced greenhouse effect that we have to do something about. What are the sources of these gases? Electricity and heat production is at the forefront at 25% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. Agriculture, forestry, and other land use is at 24%. This is why even our agriculture and land use policies and practices have to change. Industry, of course, that's another 21%. Transportation and the burning of fossil fuel for transport, whether sea, air, or road transport, that's also an issue. And buildings, the use of heating and cooking on, as well as other sources. So these are all areas of possible action, where action is already happening at various degrees in different parts of the world. But that action, unfortunately, is still not enough. So this is the Keeling curve. This is a very famous climate change curve. So these are direct measurements of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The most recent reading is 412.34 parts per million. So that's just the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And what we can see here that back in the 50s, when this started, the concentration of CO2 was something like 315. But as we speak now, it is in the 410s. And that's something like a 30% increase in concentration. And again, so you have a 30% thicker layer of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And once you release these gases into the atmosphere, they stay there for at least 100 years. So that again, they're not like they disintegrate or are absorbed in one way or another. They stay there for another 100 years. So if we look at again, we want to demonstrate that it's human-induced. It's always a good reminder. These are the ice core data. These are not direct measurements of CO2 in the atmosphere, but the measurements in the ice core and the air trapped in the ice cores. So the first chart here in the middle, that's in the last, the CO2 concentrations in the last 250 years or so since the Industrial Revolution. We can see here that after the 1950s, or even before that, a little before that, we had a significant increase in CO2 concentrations. Then the chart on the left, you'll see the last 10,000 years. Again, CO2 concentrations are around 260, 270. Then all of a sudden, in the last 2 centuries, you have a huge increase. And even if you look at the chart, the last 800,000 years, concentrations go up and down, but there's a spike, and an unusual spike that tells you there's something different in the natural system here, which is the human impact. So here again, what happens? You have 3 more, well, there are many indicators that we can talk about that tells us that climate change is happening. But one key one is, of course, temperatures in the air. They are increasing, and we know that for a fact. At least 1 degree increase all over the world, but there are parts of the world, especially in the northern hemisphere, where the increase is more pronounced. But then, as well as that, of course, you have glaciers, the snow cover reducing, glaciers melting. And of course, when they melt, the water has to go somewhere, and where does it go? It goes back to the oceans. And then, in addition to that, the heat causes oceans to expand. And then you have these 2 factors contributing to sea level rise. And sea level rise, of course, is a major threat in countries we just talked about, like Bangladesh and the Philippines. And in addition to that, one critical thing I think we should also keep in mind that we didn't know much about 15 years ago. It was discovered around in 2004, 2005, that the acidity of the oceans is increasing. So you have ocean acidification also in play. And that puts enormous pressure on marine life, coral bleaching, and so on. So it's not just heat, it's also other impacts due to climate change. And of course, each and every indicator of these, each and every change of these will have its own impacts, a cascade of impacts on human health, human life, but also infrastructure and biodiversity. So addressing climate risks, so what do we do about them? And there is this boiling frog story. It's a myth. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. So the story goes that since frogs are cold-blooded, they regulate their temperatures depending on the external temperature. So they'll keep adapting their body temperature to the external temperature, unlike humans who are endotherms, and they tend, the reason why we eat and all the metabolism that our bodies do is to maintain a stable body temperature at 37 degrees centigrade. So with frogs, it's a different story. So the story goes that if you put a frog in tepid water, if you put it in hot water, boiling water, it'll jump out straight away. But if you put it in tepid water and start increasing temperatures gradually, it'll keep adapting to the external water temperature. But once you get to the boiling point, it'll be too late to realize that temperatures are too high and the poor frog can die. This is a myth. But when it comes to ourselves, to humans, it seems that with climate change, this is how we're ectotherms. We're like frogs, but in the way we think rather than the way our bodies behave. And one perhaps evidence for this is this news excerpt from New Zealand. And this is dated August 14th, 1912. And it says that something like 2 million tons of coal is burned all over the world a year. That releases 7 million tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This tends to make the air a more effective blanket for the Earth and can raise the Earth's temperature, but this effect may be considerable in a few centuries. This was in the 20th century, and we started seeing the impact of climate change in the 20th century, but then we were saying, oh, it's going to happen, some centuries later, let's not worry about it. So that again tells us that when changes happen gradually, we tend to forget about them and focus on other day-to-day issues. Here again, this is another reminder that climate change is happening and that we have to realize this risk, these gradual changes that are happening. So what the data tells us, and this is a chart from Munich Reinsurance Company, and we can see that total natural catastrophes are on the rise since 1980 at least. So the line in yellow gives you the total number of events since 1980. So around 250 was the total number in 1980, and today it's more than 800. And if you look at the hydrological events, so floods, meteorological events like cyclones and hurricanes, climatological events, these are the likes of droughts, and then there's geophysical events. Geophysical events have no connection to climate, but all the other three do have a direct connection to our climate, and you can see the yellow line, the blue line, the green line, as well as the orange line, they're all on the rise. And this tells us something, of course. And then if you look at this chart again, natural disasters caused overall losses. This is from Munich Re again, caused overall losses of more than $5.2 trillion since 1980. And a large majority of these losses are uninsured losses. And this is another issue that we have to keep in mind, that these losses are going to increase further in the future, and we have to do something about them, especially the uninsured losses. So now people, I think, got to realize and got to admit that climate change is a risk. So this is the Global Risk Report from the World Economic Forum. You can see in the top right-hand corner that climate-related risks are perceived as high impact and very likely. Extreme weather events, failure of climate change mitigation adaptation, natural hazards, man-made environmental disasters, they're all in the right-hand corner, the ones in green. Now, one interesting, perhaps, observation on this is the spread of infectious diseases, which is on the left, the one in orange. This was, of course, this survey was done towards the end of 2019. And you can see that people do assess the infectious diseases as having somehow large impact, but they're not likely. This is perception of people. So again, we tend to sometimes maybe underestimate certain risks. So we underestimate infectious diseases and the spread of them in terms of impact as well as likelihood, as you can see. So with climate impacts, maybe we're assessing them right. Maybe this is the right assessment of climate risks, and we have to. But then the trick is the next step. The next steps rather. What should we be doing? What is that we have to do as people, as companies, and as governments? I lost the connect. If you can just move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so here again, this picture here shows you the interconnections between the different risks on the WEF report. So you see here again, climate action failure has the largest number of connections and the strongest of connections. It leads to extreme weather events. It leads to biodiversity loss. It leads to food crises. Water crises, involuntary migration. So we're now talking about climate refugees, global governance failure, as well as many other failures. So again, it's a serious threat, is a risk that leads to a cascade of other impacts and risks. And so it deserves, of course, serious action. When it comes to companies, of course, there are risks and opportunities, as well as companies, but also governments are looking at this and trying to see what sort of opportunities they can seize from climate action. But when we talk about the risks and the opportunities, we talk about transition risks. So if we start from the left, and of course, all of these do have financial impact on the income statement, cash flow statement, balance sheet. There is an impact on all of these. Now, if you look at the left side, transition risks, we have policy and legal, technology, market, reputation. Of course, there's a transition we have to make towards carbon neutrality, reducing our emissions, and many policies, technologies have been announced, but more will be announced in the future. And then there are physical risks, of course, to operations due to acute and chronic impacts of climate change. So acute would be an extreme event, a cyclone or something. Chronic will be the gradual increase in temperatures. Now, on the other side, there are opportunities, of course, due to climate action. There is resource efficiency that everyone has to do. We have to be more efficient with our electricity use, with our fuel use. We have to look for alternative sources of energy that are cleaner. Products and services, of course, there are new products, new services that need to be created and introduced to the market that presents good opportunity for all companies. And of course, new markets and resilience. When you think about climate change, the impacts it can have, that gets people to think about how they can be more resilient to these impacts, and that adds to the risk management, leads to better risk management in companies. And of course, all that leads to it feeds into strategic planning and risk management, and of course has positive or negative financial impact based on what sort of action a company takes. Okay, so that's about the risks, opportunities, climate change in general. I'll just go briefly over the UAE's policy approach to climate change. The UAE adopted its climate change plan just after the ratification of the Paris Agreement in 2016. 2017, the UAE's cabinet approved the climate plan, and it has 3 key targets. One is managing greenhouse gases, in other words, reducing our emissions, what is called mitigation in climate policy jargon. There's also the adaptation planning. So impacts of climate change are happening, and we need to adapt to these impacts. And there is also the private sector-driven innovative diversification program. We need the private sector finances as well as action to also help us achieve our targets of mitigating climate change and adapting to it. Next, this is the emissions profile of the UAE. It's not very different from the global profile of emissions, except for the electricity contribution. Something like 40% of our CO2 emissions comes from electricity. And one key reason why this is the case is because of the need for cooling in the UAE. So if you've been to the UAE, or if you read something about the UAE, you'll know that temperatures are extremely high, and virtually there is no building, no closed space without air conditioning. And this is something like 50% of our electricity bill goes to cooling. So we need to do something about that, of course. Mitigation measures, and this is one of the key things we're doing here in the UAE. First is investment in solar power. With record after record were broken in the UAE when it comes to the price of electricity from solar energy, but also the size of solar power plants. There are many of the biggest power plants in the world here in Abu Dhabi as well as in Dubai. The picture on the right is of a nuclear power plant. So we have something like 20% of our electricity is going to come from nuclear energy by 2023-24. And of course, nuclear energy is a clean source of energy. There are no emissions produced or any pollutants emitted into the air. And then the third picture here is of carbon capture and storage. So thing you can do, of course, with emissions is you capture them. So you prevent them from being released into the atmosphere and then putting them to good use. And this is what the UAE has been trying to do, and it's going to increase its CCS, carbon capture capacity by 5-fold in the next 10 years. The other important key measure the UAE is taking, like many other countries in the world, is a national adaptation program. So we need to identify the risks that climate change poses here in the UAE and then do something about it. And this is where we started this back in 2017, and we looked at 4 sectors that we designated as priority sectors for the UAE. These are energy, infrastructure, the environment, and human health. And we looked at the risks, and we published the results on our website, and we're now developing a clear action plan as to what has to be done to mitigate these risks. This is just a chart of the temperatures here in the UAE since 1900. Temperatures have been on the rise here in the UAE as in many parts of the world, but we can see somewhere in the 80s there is a steeper trend. So there is a break in the trend, and the trend of the increase in temperatures become much more steeper for some reason. And you can see that 2018, 2019 data is way high. So the 2 dots, you see a 2-degree increase instead of just 1.5. That's an acceleration of climate change, of course. We can't say that this is, we don't have enough data to be able to say that this is the increase. These are just 2 data points, but I think that the temperatures that we're seeing globally of record-breaking temperatures in 2016 and now in 2020, this trend is going to continue. So again, we have to be prepared for this. And this is in general the climate projections in the UAE. So by 2050 and 2100, what the research tells us, there's an increase in salinity of the Arabian Gulf, of the Gulf waters. Rainfall, it's going to be, we're not very sure as to what's going to happen to rainfall, but it might increase. But if it increases, it might present additional pressure on our infrastructure. Of course, humidity is projected to increase. Sea level rise, as in many parts of the world, is also going to increase, and most of our development is coastal in the UAE, so we have to, of course, be prepared. Temperatures, groundwater, the recharge of groundwater is at its lowest, and we might run out of accessible groundwater in the near future. Extreme events, we don't have enough data to come to our conclusion, but then we know that we've seen more frequent extreme events in the last 30 years, but this is still to be confirmed by science. And ocean acidification, as I mentioned, is also at play here in the UAE waters. Climate impact in the UAE, the first picture on the left, it's not just the UAE, of course, it's the whole region. This is in Kuwait. And you see the tarmac melting. The road was melting in Kuwait sometime in, I think it was July or June of 2017 because of extreme heat and this is pressure on our infrastructure due to heat. And the next picture, the fire there is an urban fire here in the UAE in August of this year. And then again, we don't have forests, when we're blessed not to have forests in the times of climate change, I guess, but urban fires are still possible. So increased temperature, any breakdown of the power systems, the grids and so on can cause fires. And we're seeing more of them. Again, this is not established by science, but then this is just an observation. We also have flash floods in the UAE. Some 570 people were stranded by flash floods here in the UAE this year. I think it was in January of this year. And then Cyclone Gono, so that was in 2007, a very significant event. It was a major cyclone that hit the eastern coast of the UAE. It hit Oman much more strongly. But then again, we're seeing more of these cyclones hitting our region in the last 10 years. These events that used to be, defined by saying that it's a 1 in 30-year event or 1 in 100-year event, these are becoming 1 in 5 years events. So this is a real issue that needs us to be prepared for in the near future and in the long term. This is again the risk assessment framework we're using to assess our risks here in the UAE. It's not very different from any other risk assessment framework, and the whole report on the methodology we're using is also available on our website if you're interested. 4 priority sectors. These are the technical reports of the findings of the risks in the 4 sectors I mentioned: the environment, the infrastructure, energy, and health. And we also propose certain measures in these reports, but then again, detailed plans are still under development. And I'll end with these 2 key private sector initiatives that the UAE government is working on together with its private sector partners. One is introducing climate adaptation in the insurance sector. So we have a thriving insurance sector that is in a growth mode. And what we need to introduce and what we need to do is to try and see what sort of opportunities there are for the insurance sector when it comes to insuring us against climate change risks. But it's also risks to them, for them to understand what sort of new risks that they haven't planned for or looked at are also becoming now more common with climate change. So this project started in Q3 of this year, and towards the end of 2021, we'll have our results and an action plan for the sector. The other important initiative is the Abu Dhabi Global Markets Sustainable Finance Agenda. ADGM is also a partner of this event, so I think maybe they'll be talking about this as well. So the agenda focuses on regulation, cooperation, awareness, and ecosystems. There are a couple of good initiatives that have been announced, like the Abu Dhabi Climate Initiative, the Green Bond Accelerator Program, and the Masdar Green REIT. There are also regulation initiatives that have been introduced, and then there are also the guiding principles of sustainable finance in the UAE that have been put in a declaration signed by the majority of financial actors here in the country. With that, my presentation comes to an end. Thank you very much again for having me. Thank you for your time. And back to you, Caroline.
Well, thank you so much, Qais. It's been a pleasure having you here today. That was a really, really comprehensive overview of the problem. And I think you've really, given us a call to action. This is a burning platform, both literally as well as figuratively, and I'm sure our treasurers will be taking on board what you've been saying, and great also to see that the UAE has plans and is taking this very, very seriously. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. It's been a great pleasure. We've really enjoyed listening to you today.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
And thank you to our audience too for joining us for this session. I'm sure you'll have got a lot out of it. Do stay on the platform. In about 5 minutes, we'll be talking about a very, very hot topic, Trish's today, of course, which is around liquidity. Yes, what could be much more important than that? Sustainability, cash management, these are really, really hot topics. So do join us then. And of course, in the meantime, just have a great Treasury Summit. Enjoy the awards later today, and happy networking. See you soon.